When a teenage girl stood up in court to speak, the judge's furious response silenced the entire room. What no one expected was that she wasn't just another witness. She was desperately trying to save her own father. The truth about what really happened would change everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. The Westbrook County Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice against the dreary October sky, its stone columns and high windows intimidating even to those who had nothing to fear. For 16-year-old Maya Collins, the building might as well have been a haunted house. Her hands trembled as she climbed the worn marble steps, clutching a manila folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. The courthouse clock chimed 9 times, each resonant note increasing her anxiety. "Maya, slow down," her Aunt Patricia called, hurrying behind her. "You don't have to do this." Maya paused, turning to face the woman who had been her guardian for the past 3 years. Patricia's face was lined with worry, her usually neat appearance slightly disheveled from the hasty morning preparations. "I do have to do this," Maya replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "Nobody else will." The heavy wooden doors opened into a world of hushed voices and formal proceedings. Maya had researched everything about courtroom protocol, watching countless videos online and reading every article she could find. Knowledge was armor, and she needed all the protection she could get. Courtroom 3B was smaller than she had imagined, with dark wood paneling and American flags flanking a raised bench. A handful of people sat scattered among the benches, lawyers in suits, a court reporter setting up her equipment, a bailiff standing at attention. Maya slid into a seat in the back row, her aunt joining her reluctantly. "This is Judge Harriet Montgomery's courtroom," Patricia whispered. "She's known for being strict, very by the book." Maya nodded, having already memorized everything about the judge who would be presiding today. Judge Montgomery had served on the bench for 23 years, with a reputation for being fair but unyielding, particularly with disruptions to her courtroom. There were rumors she'd once held an attorney in contempt for arriving 5 minutes late after a flat tire. The side door opened, and everyone rose as the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harriet Montgomery." The judge swept in, her black robes billowing around her tall frame. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and rectangular glasses sat on a face that had clearly seen decades of human folly and deceit. She took her place on the bench, surveyed the room with piercing gray eyes, and nodded. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice carrying authority that silenced even the quietest whispers. "We have a full docket today, so let's proceed efficiently." The proceedings began with routine matters, traffic violations, minor disputes, small claims. Maya listened intently, studying the judge's mannerisms, the way she addressed different people, how her expression changed minutely with each case. Judge Montgomery was consistent in her formality, addressing everyone with the same measured tone regardless of their status. "Next case, Commonwealth versus James Collins," the bailiff announced, and Maya's heart leaped into her throat. A side door opened, and 2 correctional officers escorted in a man wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Even after 3 years, the sight of her father in prison clothing made Maya's chest constrict. James Collins looked thinner than he had at his trial, his once robust frame diminished by prison food and constant stress. His dark hair, so like Maya's own, was now streaked with gray that hadn't been there before his incarceration. His eyes scanned the courtroom, widening slightly when they found Maya. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent plea for her to leave. She lifted her chin and stayed firmly in place. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Ms. Winters, approached the bench first. "Your Honor, this is a status hearing regarding Mr. Collins' appeal. The state maintains that the conviction was proper and that the new evidence claimed by the defense is insufficient to warrant a new trial," Judge Montgomery nodded, then turned to James Collins' court-appointed attorney, a young man who looked barely out of law school. He shuffled papers nervously before speaking. "Your Honor, we've submitted documentation showing that key evidence was not properly disclosed during discovery, specifically the full toxicology report that could have supported Mr. Collins's version of events." The judge peered over her glasses. "Mr. Daniels, I've reviewed your motion. The toxicology report in question shows trace amounts of substances that don't materially change the facts of the case. Mr. Collins was the driver in a collision that resulted in the death of Mrs. Evelyn Porter. His blood alcohol level was above the legal limit." "But, Your Honor," the young lawyer persisted, though his voice lacked conviction, "the report also indicates that Mrs. Porter had taken medication that warns against driving. This creates reasonable doubt about who was primarily at fault in the accident." Ms. Winters interjected smoothly. "The medication in Mrs. Porter's system was prescribed and within therapeutic levels. It doesn't change the fact that Mr. Collins was intoxicated and crossed the center line." Maya could see her father's shoulders slump as his attorney failed to make a compelling argument. The young lawyer seemed intimidated by both the prosecutor and the judge, his arguments growing weaker with each exchange. "Furthermore," Judge Montgomery continued, "the jury was presented with all relevant evidence regarding the crash reconstruction. They determined that Mr. Collins's vehicle was primarily responsible." Maya couldn't bear it any longer. She had spent months compiling evidence, consulting with forensic experts online, reviewing accident reports. She knew things her father's lawyer clearly didn't, or wouldn't, present. Before her aunt could stop her, Maya stood up. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice cracking slightly, "the accident reconstruction was flawed." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Montgomery's gaze snapped to Maya, her expression darkening like a sudden thunderstorm. "Young lady, sit down immediately," the judge commanded. "This is a court of law, not a classroom debate." Maya remained standing, her legs trembling but her resolve firm. "But, Your Honor, I have evidence that—" "Bailiff," Judge Montgomery interrupted, her voice razor-sharp. "If this young person doesn't sit down and remain silent, remove her from my courtroom." The bailiff moved toward Maya, but she stood her ground, opening the manila folder she'd brought. "The skid marks measured at the scene don't match the reconstruction report," Maya pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "I have photos that show—" "This is completely inappropriate," Ms. Winters objected. "Your Honor, this disruption—" "Enough!" Judge Montgomery's voice thundered through the courtroom. She slammed her gavel down so hard that Maya flinched. "Young lady, you are in contempt of this court. Bailiff, escort her out immediately." The bailiff reached Maya, taking her arm firmly but not unkindly. Her father half rose from his seat, alarm in his eyes, before the correctional officers pushed him back down. "Maya, don't," he called out. "Please, just go home." "Dad, they got it wrong," Maya cried as the bailiff began leading her toward the exit. "The accident reconstruction expert made a mistake. Mrs. Porter crossed the line first. It's in the original photos." Judge Montgomery banged her gavel again. "Remove her now and clear the courtroom." As Maya was being pulled toward the door, she made one last desperate attempt. "Judge Montgomery, please. You sentenced an innocent man. My father didn't cause that accident." Something in her words, or perhaps the raw emotion in her voice, caused the judge to pause. For a brief moment, the stern facade cracked and uncertainty flickered across her face. "Wait," Judge Montgomery said, raising her hand to halt the bailiff. Her piercing gaze fixed on Maya. "What exactly are you claiming to have?" Maya held up her folder with shaking hands. "Evidence that wasn't presented at trial. Evidence that proves my father is innocent." The courtroom held its collective breath as Judge Montgomery studied the determined teenager before her. After what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "Approach the bench." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Maya approached the bench, her heart hammering against her ribs. Judge Montgomery's steely gaze never left her face, but something had shifted in the atmosphere, a crack in the formal proceedings that allowed a sliver of uncertainty to enter. "Your Honor," Ms. Winters objected, rising from her seat, "this is highly irregular. This young woman has no standing in these proceedings." "I'm aware of proper procedure, Counselor," Judge Montgomery replied coolly. "Nevertheless, I want to hear what she has to say." She turned back to Maya. "State your name for the record." "Maya Collins, Your Honor." Maya's voice was steadier now, bolstered by this unexpected opportunity. "I'm James Collins' daughter." The judge's expression remained unreadable. "Ms. Collins, while I understand your concern for your father, disrupting court proceedings is not the way to address it. Your father has legal representation." Maya glanced at the young attorney who had barely put up a fight for her father. He was staring at her with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "With all due respect, Your Honor, his attorney hasn't presented all the evidence." Maya placed her folder on the bench. "May I show you what I found?" After a moment's hesitation, Judge Montgomery nodded. "Proceed, but be brief." Maya opened the folder with trembling fingers. "These are the original crime scene photos taken by Officer Rodriguez." She laid out 3 photographs showing skid marks on asphalt. The accident reconstruction expert based his conclusions on measurements taken hours after the initial documentation, after it had started raining. The judge examined the photos, her brow furrowing slightly. "The original photos show skid marks from Mrs. Porter's vehicle crossing the center line first," Maya continued, pointing to a specific mark. "But in the expert's testimony, he only referenced measurements taken later, which had been partially washed away by rain." Judge Montgomery peered more closely at the photographs. "How did you obtain these?" "They were in the discovery materials my father received, but his previous attorney never highlighted their significance. I've been studying this case for 3 years, Your Honor." Ms. Winters stepped forward. "Your Honor, these photos were available to the defense during trial. If they failed to properly utilize them, that's not grounds for a new hearing." "There's more," Maya persisted, pulling out another document. "The accident reconstruction expert, Matthew Jenkins, has been cited twice for procedural errors in other cases. In State v. Grayson last year, his testimony was thrown out because he failed to account for weather conditions affecting evidence." Judge Montgomery's eyebrows rose slightly. "This information about Mr. Jenkins wasn't presented at trial?" "No, Your Honor, and there's something else." Maya hesitated, aware she was treading dangerous ground. "Mr. Jenkins has a connection to the prosecutor's office that wasn't disclosed. He's Ms. Winters' brother-in-law." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ms. Winters' face flushed crimson. "That's preposterous," she snapped. "Your Honor, this is getting absurd." Judge Montgomery held up her hand for silence. "Ms. Winters, is there any truth to this allegation?" The prosecutor's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Matthew Jenkins is married to my husband's sister, but that's hardly a conflict of interest. He's a certified expert who has testified in dozens of cases." "Yet you didn't disclose this relationship during trial," Judge Montgomery noted, her tone cooling several degrees. She turned back to Maya. "How did you discover this connection?" "Social media, Your Honor. Mr. Jenkins and Ms. Winters are in family photos together on his public profile. And there's an article in the Westbrook Gazette from 3 years ago about a charity golf tournament where they're identified as in-laws." Judge Montgomery's lips thinned to a tight line. She glanced at James Collins, who was watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Mr. Daniels," the judge addressed the defense attorney, "were you aware of these issues with the evidence?" The young lawyer flushed. I inherited this case recently, Your Honor. I haven't had time to fully investigate all aspects of the original trial." Maya seized the opportunity. Your Honor, my father's previous attorneys didn't pursue these issues either. The public defender's office is overwhelmed, and they pushed him to accept a plea deal from the beginning. He's never had someone really fight for him. Judge Montgomery was silent for a long moment, studying the documents before her. The courtroom remained hushed, tension building with each passing second. Ms. Collins, she finally said, while I don't condone your disruption of these proceedings, I cannot ignore potential issues with evidence. She turned to Ms. Winters. Counselor, your failure to disclose your relationship with a key expert witness is troubling. Ms. Winters straightened her jacket defensively. The relationship is distant and had no bearing on his testimony. That wasn't your determination to make, Judge Montgomery replied sharply. She turned to the bailiff. Please clear the courtroom except for the parties directly involved in this case. We need to discuss this matter further. As spectators filed out, Patricia squeezed Maya's shoulder supportively before leaving. When the doors closed, Judge Montgomery removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, suddenly looking tired. Ms. Collins, I want to be clear that this approach was completely inappropriate. There are proper channels for introducing new evidence. I tried those channels, Your Honor, Maya replied. I wrote letters to the public defender's office, to the district attorney, even to the Bar Association. No one would listen. Something flickered in Judge Montgomery's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. How old are you, Ms. Collins? 16, Your Honor. And you've been investigating your father's case for 3 years? Since his conviction? Maya nodded. My father isn't perfect, but he's not a killer. He admits he had drinks that night. It was the anniversary of my mother's death. But he swears Mrs. Porter crossed into his lane first, and he couldn't avoid the collision. Judge Montgomery glanced at James Collins. Mr. Collins, what do you have to say about your daughter's actions today? James straightened in his chair, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. I told Maya to let it go, Your Honor. I didn't want her spending her teenage years obsessed with clearing my name. But she's stubborn, like her mother was. His voice softened. And she's brilliant. Always has been. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Ms. Winters, did you review these original crime scene photos before trial? Of course, Your Honor. They were inconclusive at best. The later measurements were more comprehensive. Measurements taken after it rained, Maya interjected, then quickly added, Sorry, Your Honor. Judge Montgomery turned her attention back to the young defense attorney. Mr. Daniels, I'm going to give you an opportunity to properly review this evidence and present a formal motion. I'm also ordering the district attorney's office to review all evidence and correspondence related to this case. She fixed Ms. Winters with a stern look, including any communications with Mr. Jenkins. Ms. Winters' jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. In the meantime, Judge Montgomery continued, I'm ordering a stay on Mr. Collins's sentence pending this review. He'll remain in custody, but no transfer back to state prison will occur. Maya couldn't suppress a small gasp of hope. Judge Montgomery noticed and added firmly, This is not a ruling on the merits of the case, Ms. Collins. It's merely a procedural pause to ensure justice is properly served. Thank you, Your Honor, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. The judge replaced her glasses, once again the embodiment of judicial impartiality. Court will reconvene on this matter in 2 weeks. Mr. Daniels, I expect a properly prepared motion by then. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. As Maya gathered her documents, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events, she noticed something strange. Judge Montgomery was staring at her intently, an unreadable expression on her face. For a brief moment, something like pain flickered in the older woman's eyes before she quickly looked away. Maya wondered about that look as she was escorted out, allowed a quick hug with her father before he was led back to holding. What had caused that momentary crack in the judge's formidable armor? And why did she feel like Judge Montgomery's sudden willingness to listen had nothing to do with legal procedure and everything to do with something deeply personal? The courthouse emptied gradually as the day's proceedings concluded, but Judge Harriet Montgomery remained in her chambers, staring at the collection of framed credentials on her wall without really seeing them. The Collins case had shaken her more than she cared to admit, not because of the possible miscarriage of justice, though that troubled her deeply, but because of the 16-year-old girl who had stormed her courtroom with a manila folder and unshakable conviction. Harriet removed her judicial robe and hung it carefully on the wooden stand in the corner. Beneath it, she wore a charcoal gray suit that complemented her silver hair, maintaining the air of authority even without the symbolic black garment. She sank into her leather chair and opened the Collins file again, examining the crime scene photos that Maya had presented. The girl had a point. The skid marks in the earlier photos did suggest a different sequence of events than what the expert had testified to. And if Winters had indeed failed to disclose her relationship with the expert witness. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, quickly closing the file. Her law clerk, Marcus Chen, entered with a stack of documents. "The research you requested on Commonwealth versus Collins, Judge." "Thank you, Marcus." She accepted the papers, noting his curious expression. "If you don't mind me asking," he ventured, "what happened in court today? The clerks are talking about a teenage girl who stood up to you." Harriet's lips thinned. Court gossip travels faster than legal precedent. "They're saying you actually listened to her," Marcus continued, undaunted. "That's unusual." "Are they saying I'm going soft, Marcus?" she asked dryly. "Not exactly. More like they're wondering why this case in particular got to you." Harriet sighed, removing her glasses. "Sometimes we need to be reminded why we do this job. That girl, she reminded me of someone." Marcus waited for her to elaborate, but Harriet simply started organizing the research he'd brought. Taking the hint, he nodded and left her alone with her thoughts. When the door closed, Harriet opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, yellowed with age. A young girl with dark braids stood beside a tall man in a mechanic's uniform, both smiling at the camera. The girl couldn't have been more than 13, but her eyes held the same determined spark she'd seen in Maya Collins today. Harriet ran her finger over the image of the man, her throat tightening. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, "I saw someone like me today." The memory surfaced unbidden. Harriet, at 17, standing in a courtroom much like her own, trying desperately to convince a judge that her father was innocent. Unlike Maya, she hadn't been allowed to speak. The judge had dismissed her without a hearing, and her father had spent 7 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. By the time he was exonerated, cancer had taken root in his lungs from years working with asbestos without proper protection. He died 3 months after his release. Harriet had become a lawyer because of that day, and later a judge, vowing to never silence someone seeking justice simply because of their age or status. Yet today, she'd nearly done exactly that. Her intercom buzzed, jolting her from the past. "Judge Montgomery, District Attorney Lawrence is here to see you." Harriet quickly returned the photograph to her drawer. "Send him in." Richard Lawrence entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. At 57, he maintained the physique of the college athlete he'd once been, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled. "Harriet," he greeted her, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk about what happened in court today." "Richard?" she replied coolly. "I was wondering how long it would take you to appear." He took a seat without waiting for an invitation. "What were you thinking, allowing a teenage girl to present evidence like that? It completely undermines proper procedure." "What I'm thinking is that a potential Brady violation occurred in my courtroom." Harriet's voice was measured but firm. Winters failed to disclose her relationship with the expert witness. It's a distant connection at best. Jenkins is a certified expert who has been cited for procedural errors in other cases, Harriet interrupted. Another fact that wasn't disclosed to the defense. Richard leaned forward. Harriet, we've known each other for 20 years. You know I run a clean office. If there were oversights in this case, they weren't deliberate. Deliberate or not, they need to be addressed. She fixed him with a penetrating stare. Why are you really here, Richard? The Collins case is hardly high profile. He shifted slightly. I'm concerned about precedent. If word gets out that anyone can interrupt court proceedings with wild accusations. They weren't wild, Harriet cut in. The girl had done her research, more thoroughly than the public defender's office, apparently. Richard's expression hardened. The evidence was reviewed at trial and found convincing by a jury. One emotional teenager shouldn't be able to derail justice. Justice? Harriet repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Is that what we're calling it when a man is convicted based on evidence gathered after rainfall and testimony from the prosecutor's brother-in-law? You're taking her word over the entire justice system. I'm doing my job, Richard, ensuring that the system works as it should. Harriet stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Ms. Winters will comply with my order to review all evidence and communications, or she'll face sanctions. Am I clear? Richard rose slowly. Crystal clear. But I hope you know what you're doing, Harriet. Once you start questioning verdicts based on emotional appeals, I'm questioning this verdict based on evidence that suggests a miscarriage of justice may have occurred, she corrected firmly. That's not emotion, it's duty. After Richard left, Harriet sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had taken more out of her than she'd expected. She knew Richard well enough to recognize when he was genuinely concerned, and this wasn't it. His interest in the Collins case seemed disproportionate, which only heightened her suspicions. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. Detective Saunders, a gruff voice answered. Michael, it's Judge Montgomery. I need a favor. Name it, Judge. I need you to look into an accident from 3 years ago. The victim was Evelyn Porter. The convicted driver was James Collins. The DUI manslaughter case? What about it? I need to know if there's any connection between Evelyn Porter and anyone in the district attorney's office or the police department. There was a pause on the other end. That's an unusual request, Judge. Mind telling me why? Let's just say some irregularities have come to light. I'd rather discuss details in person. Understood. I'll see what I can find. Harriet ended the call and checked the time. It was nearly 7, and the courthouse had grown quiet. She gathered her things, deciding to continue her review of the case at home. As she reached for her coat, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Leave the Collins case alone. You don't know what you're getting into. Harriet stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. After a moment's hesitation, she took a screenshot, then deleted the message. Someone was nervous about her reopening this case, nervous enough to threaten a judge, which was a felony in itself. Far from intimidating her, the message only strengthened her resolve. She gathered the Collins file and slipped it into her briefcase. Whatever was going on with this case, she intended to find out. As she left her chambers, Harriet found herself thinking again about Maya Collins. The girl had shown remarkable courage and intelligence today. In another life, that could have been her. If only someone had been willing to listen all those years ago. I hear you, Maya, she whispered to the empty hallway, and I promise, I won't look away. Across town, Maya sat at her aunt's kitchen table, surrounded by more documents and her laptop. The adrenaline from the morning's confrontation had worn off, leaving her both exhausted and exhilarated. Judge Montgomery had actually listened to her, After 3 years of doors slammed in her face, someone with power had finally paid attention. "You should eat something," Aunt Patricia said, placing a sandwich next to Maya's laptop. "You've barely stopped since we got home." "I can't stop now," Maya replied, not looking up from the screen. "Judge Montgomery gave us a chance, but we only have 2 weeks. I need to make sure Mr. Daniels has everything he needs to make a strong case." Patricia sat down across from her niece. "Maya, you did something amazing today, but you're 16. This responsibility shouldn't all fall on you." Maya finally looked up, her dark eyes serious. "Who else is going to do it? Dad's lawyers have failed him for 3 years. I can't trust them to get it right now." Patricia sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Maya's jaw, so like her father's, so like her late mother's. "At least take a break. You need rest to think clearly." "I will," Maya promised, though they both knew she wouldn't. Not until she'd done everything possible to free her father. As Patricia left the kitchen, Maya's phone dinged with an email notification. She opened it to find a message from an anonymous address. Inside was a single line of text. "Check the relationship between Evelyn Porter and Judge William Hargrove." Maya frowned. Judge Hargrove had presided over her father's original trial. Why would someone anonymously point her toward a connection between him and the accident victim? And who knew she was investigating the case? She glanced out the window, suddenly feeling exposed. Somewhere out there, someone was watching her investigation. The question was, were they trying to help her or warn her off? Morning light streamed through the blinds of Judge Montgomery's modest suburban home as she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by case files and a cooling cup of coffee. She had been up since 5, unable to sleep as the Collins case gnawed at her conscience. The anonymous text message she'd received only reinforced her suspicion that something was deeply wrong with James Collins's conviction. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her concentration. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Michael Saunders standing on her porch, his weathered face serious. She'd known Mike for nearly 20 years, trusting him as one of the few genuinely incorruptible officers in the department. "You look terrible," he said bluntly when she opened the door. "Good morning to you too, Mike," Harriet replied dryly, stepping aside to let him in. He followed her to the kitchen, eyeing the spread of documents. "Working from home now?" "I needed privacy." She poured him a cup of coffee. "What did you find?" Mike pulled out a small notebook. "You were right to be suspicious. Evelyn Porter was Judge William Hargrove's first cousin once removed." Harriet's eyebrows rose. The judge who presided over Collins's trial was related to the victim? Was this disclosed? "Not officially. I had to dig deep to find it. They didn't share a last name, and the connection was through Hargrove's mother's side of the family. But they weren't strangers. I found photos of them together at family gatherings." "That's a clear conflict of interest," Harriet murmured, adding this revelation to her mental list of irregularities. Hargrove should have recused himself immediately. Mike nodded grimly. "It gets worse. Porter's husband Gerald donated substantially to D.A. Lawrence's last 3 campaigns. He also sits on the Police Benevolent Association Board and has funded equipment for the department." Harriet's stomach tightened. "So the victim's husband has connections to both the DA's office and the police department. Connections strong enough that people might feel they owe him." "Exactly. And there's something else." Mike hesitated. The first officer on the scene that night was Brian Kellerman. "Why is that significant?" "Kellerman and Gerald Porter play golf together twice a month. They're close friends." Harriet leaned back in her chair, the implications settling like lead in her stomach. So the responding officer, who would have documented the initial evidence, was friends with the victim's husband. The same officer who took those first photos the girl mentioned in court. Mike sipped his coffee. the ones showing skid marks that supposedly disappeared by the time the reconstruction expert arrived. Were the weather conditions documented that night? Mike nodded. Light rain began approximately 1 hour after the accident. By the time Jenkins arrived to do measurements, it had been raining steadily for nearly 2 hours. Harriet stood and paced the length of her kitchen. This is starting to look less like oversight and more like deliberate manipulation of evidence. There's one more thing, Mike said, his expression grave. Collins's blood alcohol level was 0.09, just barely over the legal limit. But the lab technician who ran the test, Sandra Torres, was let go 6 months later for inconsistencies in her work. Several of her results were called into question, but they never revisited the Collins case. Harriet stopped pacing. Why wasn't this brought up during the appeals process? According to the records, Collins's first appeal attorney never requested the lab technician's personnel file. The issues with Torres only came to light in other cases. And his second attorney? Seems he inherited a mess and barely had time to get up to speed before yesterday's hearing. Mike closed his notebook. Harriet, what exactly are we dealing with here? She sighed heavily. I'm not sure yet. It could be a series of unfortunate coincidences and procedural oversights, or it could be something more deliberate. Either way, a man may have been wrongfully convicted, and I need to know the truth. Be careful, Mike warned. If there was intentional misconduct, a lot of powerful people could be implicated. People don't like having their mistakes exposed, especially when those mistakes put an innocent man in prison. Harriet thought of the anonymous text message. I've already received a warning to back off. Mike straightened, instantly alert. What kind of warning? She showed him the screenshot. His expression darkened. This is a direct threat to a judge. I can open an investigation. Not yet, Harriet decided. I need more information first. If we start an official investigation now, evidence might disappear. You're assuming there's a cover-up. I'm assuming nothing, she corrected. But I want all the facts before we move forward. After Mike left, Harriet sat alone in her kitchen, contemplating her next steps. As a judge, she had to maintain impartiality, but the mounting evidence of impropriety in the Collins case demanded action. She thought again of Maya Collins, fighting for her father with nothing but determination and a manila folder. She reached for her phone and dialed the public defender's office. This is Judge Montgomery. I need to speak with Samuel Daniels regarding the Collins case. Across town, Maya was having her own early morning meeting. She'd arranged to meet Mr. Daniels, her father's attorney, at a coffee shop near her school. To her surprise, he'd agreed immediately when she called. I owe you an apology, he said as he slid into the booth across from her. I should have been more thorough in my review of your father's case. Maya studied him carefully. He looked younger in casual clothes, probably only a few years out of law school. Why weren't you? Is it because you don't think he's innocent? Samuel Daniels sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Honestly, I'm drowning, Maya. I have 78 active cases. Most public defenders do. We don't have the resources or time to give each case the attention it deserves. My dad's life is worth more than being one of 78 cases, Maya said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. You're right, he admitted. And after what happened in court yesterday, I stayed up all night reviewing everything. You were right about the discrepancies in the evidence. Maya's heart leaped. So you'll fight for him now? Really fight? Yes, Samuel promised, but I need your help. You know this case better than anyone. I want to understand everything you've discovered. For the next hour, Maya walked him through her findings, the original crime scene photos, the weather reports, the connections she'd discovered between various parties involved in the case. Samuel took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. There's something else, Maya said finally, pulling out her phone. I received an anonymous email last night suggesting I look into a connection between Evelyn Porter and Judge Hargrove, who presided over my dad's trial. Samuel frowned. Anonymous? That's concerning. Have you found anything? Not yet. I was hoping you might have access to resources I don't. I'll look into it, he promised. But Maya, I'm worried about you. If someone is sending you anonymous tips, they know you're investigating. That could be dangerous. Maya straightened her shoulders. I'm not stopping now. My dad has been in prison for 3 years for something he didn't do. Samuel studied her face. You remind me of why I became a public defender. I wanted to help people like your dad, people the system fails. He sighed. Somewhere along the way, I got overwhelmed by the caseload and started going through the motions. It's not too late to change that, Maya said softly. His expression hardened with resolve. You're right, starting with your father's case. He gathered his notes. I have a motion to prepare, and only 2 weeks to do it. I'll be in touch. As Samuel left, Maya's phone buzzed with another email notification. Her heart raced when she saw it was from the same anonymous address as before. This message was longer. Porter's husband sits on the Police Benevolent Association board. First responding officer was his friend. Judge Hargrove was Porter's cousin. DA received campaign donations from Porter's husband. Start connecting the dots. Maya stared at the message, both thrilled and terrified by the implications. If all this was true, her father had never stood a chance at a fair trial. The entire system had been aligned against him from the moment of the accident. But who was sending her this information? And why now, after 3 years? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her aunt. Judge Montgomery's clerk called. The judge wants to meet with you privately this afternoon. What's going on? Maya read the message twice, her mind racing. Why would Judge Montgomery want to meet with her outside of court? Was this good news or bad? Had she discovered something about the case, or was she going to reprimand Maya for her courtroom behavior? Only one way to find out, she decided, texting back that she would go. Whatever Judge Montgomery wanted, Maya was ready to face her again, this time without having to cause a scene to be heard. Judge Montgomery's chambers looked different in the afternoon light. The imposing legal tomes and framed credentials remained, but with sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the room felt less intimidating than Maya had expected. Or perhaps it was the judge herself who seemed changed. Without her robes, in a simple navy suit, Harriet Montgomery looked more human, the severe bun replaced by a neat silver bob. Thank you for coming, Ms. Collins, the judge said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. I appreciate your discretion regarding this meeting. Maya sat down carefully, her posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. Am I in trouble for what happened in court? A hint of a smile touched Judge Montgomery's lips. If you were, we'd be having this conversation in a courtroom, not my chambers. She removed her glasses, studying Maya with keen gray eyes. I wanted to speak with you privately about your father's case. Maya's heart raced. Have you found something? I've been reviewing the evidence you presented, the judge said carefully, and I've made some additional inquiries. What I've discovered concerns me deeply. She pushed a folder across the desk. Maya opened it to find documents she hadn't seen before. Personnel records for the lab technician who tested her father's blood, financial records showing donations from Gerald Porter to various law enforcement causes, and photos showing Judge Hargrove and Evelyn Porter at what appeared to be family gatherings. How did you get these? Maya whispered, leafing through the evidence that confirmed what her anonymous informant had suggested. I have resources available to me as a judge, Harriet replied, not quite answering the question. The question is, how did you know to look for connections between Judge Hargrove and the victim? That wasn't part of what you presented in court. Maya hesitated, unsure whether to reveal the anonymous emails. I received a tip. Judge Montgomery leaned forward. From whom? I don't know. Anonymous emails started coming after the hearing yesterday. They pointed me toward these connections. The judge's expression tightened. Have you told anyone else about these messages? Just Mr. Daniels, my father's lawyer. Harriet nodded, seeming relieved. Maya, what I'm about to tell you must remain confidential. I believe your father's trial was compromised by multiple conflicts of interest and possibly deliberate misconduct. The connections between Judge Hargrove, Gerald Porter, and various officials involved in the case suggest a coordinated effort to secure a conviction regardless of the facts. Maya's throat constricted. You believe he's innocent? I believe he didn't receive a fair trial, the judge clarified. Whether he's innocent is still a legal determination to be made, but I am concerned that evidence was manipulated to ensure his conviction. Why? Maya asked, the question that had haunted her for 3 years. Why would they do this to him? He's just a mechanic. He wasn't anyone important. Judge Montgomery steepled her fingers. That's what I'm still trying to understand. There must be a reason why so many people were invested in your father's conviction. Something beyond the tragic death of Evelyn Porter. Maya's mind raced. The only unusual thing was where the accident happened. Dad wasn't supposed to be on that road. He told me he took a different route home that night because a customer called about an emergency repair at the last minute. Judge Montgomery's eyes sharpened. Do you remember the customer's name? Maya shook her head. Dad never mentioned it. Is it important? Possibly. It might explain why your father was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The judge made a note. I'll have someone look into his client records from that period. Why are you helping us? Maya asked suddenly. Yesterday in court, you were ready to have me thrown out. What changed? Harriet was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to a photograph on her credenza that Maya couldn't quite see. Let's just say I recognize determination when I see it. You reminded me of someone I once knew. Before Maya could press further, the judge continued. I've scheduled a private hearing for tomorrow morning. Just the attorneys, your father, myself, and a court reporter. We need to address these issues before they become public. Why private? Maya frowned. Shouldn't people know what happened? Because, Ms. Collins, if what I suspect is true, there are powerful people involved who won't hesitate to destroy evidence, or worse, if they feel threatened. Judge Montgomery's expression was grave. I've already received a warning to back off this case. Maya's eyes widened. I'm not backing off. I didn't expect you would, the judge replied with the ghost of a smile. But we need to proceed carefully, which brings me to why I called you here. I need to know everything you've discovered about your father's case, including anything that might seem insignificant. For the next hour, Maya shared everything, her methodical investigation, the experts she'd consulted online, the public records she'd obtained through persistent requests. Judge Montgomery listened intently, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. There's one more thing, Maya said finally, pulling out her phone. I saved the accident reconstruction software the prosecution used at trial. Their expert testified that it proved my dad crossed the center line first, but when I input the measurements from the original photos instead of the ones taken after the rain, it shows a completely different scenario. She opened the program and handed her phone to the judge. The animation clearly showed Evelyn Porter's vehicle crossing the center line first, with James Collins swerving to avoid her and losing control. Judge Montgomery watched the simulation twice. This is compelling, but would need to be verified by an independent expert to be admissible. I already found one, Maya said. Professor Aaron Chen at State University. He specializes in accident reconstruction and agreed to review the case pro bono. He said the original simulation was fundamentally flawed because it used inaccurate measurements. The judge raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You've been thorough." "It's my dad's life," Maya said simply. Judge Montgomery nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I need to ask you something difficult, Maya. Is there any chance your father had been drinking that night? Not whether he was legally intoxicated, but whether he had consumed alcohol at all?" Maya didn't flinch from the question. "Yes. It was the anniversary of my mom's death. Dad always has a few drinks on that day. He admitted that from the beginning. But he wasn't drunk, and he didn't cause the accident." The judge seemed satisfied with her honesty. The blood test showed a level just barely above the legal limit, and now we know the lab technician who conducted the test was later fired for inconsistencies in her work. It's possible the results weren't accurate. "Does this mean my dad can come home?" Maya asked, hope creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain calm. "Not yet," Judge Montgomery cautioned. "There's a process we must follow even with this new evidence. But I promise you, I will ensure that process is fair this time." As their meeting concluded, the judge walked Maya to the door. "Be careful who you trust with this information, Ms. Collins. Until we know exactly what happened and who was involved, you should assume that people may try to interfere with your efforts." Maya nodded solemnly. "I understand." As she turned to leave, Judge Montgomery added, "You know, in all my years on the bench, I've never met anyone quite like you, Maya. Your father is fortunate to have such a dedicated advocate." Maya looked back at the judge, surprised by the personal comment. "I'm just doing what anyone would do for someone they love." "No," Harriet said softly. "You're doing what very few would have the courage or persistence to do. Don't underestimate how rare that is." As Maya walked through the courthouse corridors, she felt a strange mix of validation and fear. Judge Montgomery believed her, believed in her father's case. After 3 years of being dismissed and ignored, finally someone with power was listening. But the judge's warnings lingered. Powerful people were involved. Evidence had been manipulated. Someone had threatened a judge to stop the investigation. What had her father stumbled into that night on that lonely stretch of road? Her phone buzzed with another anonymous email. "Watch your back. They know you're getting close. Don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to help." Maya froze, the warning sending a chill down her spine. She glanced around the empty courthouse hallway, suddenly feeling exposed. The timing was unsettling, almost as if whoever was sending these messages knew about her meeting with Judge Montgomery. The question that had seemed academic before now felt urgent and frightening. Who was sending these warnings, and how did they know so much about what was happening? The small conference room adjacent to Judge Montgomery's chambers was tense with anticipation the following morning. Instead of the formal courtroom setting, the judge had arranged for a private hearing with only essential personnel present. James Collins sat at one end of the polished oak table, dressed in a jail-issued jumpsuit but without handcuffs, a small courtesy that hadn't escaped Maya's notice. She sat beside her father, close enough to occasionally squeeze his hand reassuringly. Samuel Daniels arrived with an energy Maya hadn't seen before, setting down a leather briefcase bulging with documents. Across the table, Ms. Winters looked distinctly uncomfortable, flanked by a grim-faced Richard Lawrence. The district attorney's presence at what should have been a routine hearing spoke volumes about how seriously they were taking this situation. Judge Montgomery entered last, wearing her judicial robes despite the informal setting. A court reporter followed, setting up equipment in the corner. "This proceeding will be on the record," the judge announced, taking her seat at the head of the table. "We're here to address significant concerns regarding Commonwealth versus Collins. I want to be clear. This is not a trial or a formal appeal. This is an inquiry into potential misconduct and conflicts of interest that may have compromised the integrity of the original proceedings. Richard Lawrence shifted forward. Your Honor, I must object to the characterization of— Save it, Richard. Judge Montgomery cut him off sharply. I've reviewed enough evidence to warrant serious concern, and I've called this hearing precisely to give your office an opportunity to address these issues before I take more formal action. The threat hanging in her words silenced him. Ms. Winters glanced nervously at her boss, then shuffled through her papers. Let's begin with the most straightforward issue, Judge Montgomery continued. Ms. Winters, were you aware that your expert witness, Matthew Jenkins, was your brother-in-law? The prosecutor's face flushed. Yes, Your Honor. And you didn't disclose this relationship to the defense or to Judge Hargrove? I didn't consider it relevant to his testimony. He's a certified expert who— That wasn't your determination to make, Judge Montgomery interrupted. The defense had a right to know about any relationship that might create bias, particularly one as direct as family. Samuel Daniels leaned forward. Your Honor, if I may, we've discovered that Mr. Jenkins has testified in 17 cases prosecuted by Ms. Winters, and in every single one, his findings supported the prosecution's theory. Statistically, that's highly improbable without some form of collaboration. Maya watched Ms. Winters' face carefully. The prosecutor wasn't meeting anyone's eyes, a far cry from her confident demeanor in court yesterday. Furthermore, Samuel continued, Mr. Jenkins failed to note in his report that it had been raining for nearly 2 hours before he took his measurements, a critical factor that would have affected the evidence. Your Honor, Richard Lawrence interjected, while I acknowledge Ms. Winters should have disclosed the relationship, these allegations of deliberate misconduct are unfounded. At worst, this was an oversight. Judge Montgomery's expression was stone. An oversight that affected a man's freedom, Mr. Lawrence. She turned to James Collins. Mr. Collins, I understand you claim you were on that road because of a last-minute service call. Do you remember who the client was? James nodded, his voice steady despite his obvious tension. Walter Kruger. He called about a problem with his delivery truck. Said it was an emergency, needed it fixed that night for an early morning delivery. The judge made a note. And had you worked with Mr. Kruger before? No, ma'am. He said he got my name from another customer. I almost turned him down because it was so late, but business had been slow that month and I needed the money. Maya noticed a strange expression pass between Lawrence and Winters, a flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed. Something you'd like to share, Mr. Lawrence? Judge Montgomery asked, having caught the same look. The district attorney cleared his throat. No, Your Honor. Just surprised by the coincidence. What coincidence would that be? Lawrence hesitated. Walter Kruger was Evelyn Porter's brother-in-law, her sister's husband. A heavy silence fell over the room. Maya felt her father stiffen beside her. Are you saying, Judge Montgomery said slowly, that the man who called Mr. Collins out that night, putting him on the road where the accident occurred, was related to the victim by marriage? I wasn't aware of the connection until now, Lawrence insisted, though his discomfort was palpable. Judge Montgomery turned to James Collins. Mr. Collins, was there actually a broken-down truck when you arrived? James shook his head, his face pale. No. When I got there, the address was an empty warehouse. I called the number he'd given me, but it was disconnected. I figured it was a prank call and headed home. That's when the accident happened. Maya's mind raced, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. It was a setup, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Someone lured my father onto that road deliberately. That's a serious accusation, Lawrence bristled. Is it? Judge Montgomery asked quietly. Because it appears we have a convergence of troubling connections. The victim's husband had close ties to the responding officer and donated to the DA's office. The victim's cousin presided over the trial. The victim's brother-in-law lured the defendant to the scene. And now we learn that the reconstruction expert who provided crucial testimony was related to the prosecutor. She fixed Lawrence with a penetrating stare. At what point do coincidences become conspiracy, Mr. Lawrence? The district attorney's face had grown ashen. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of— I find that difficult to believe, Judge Montgomery interrupted, especially since you personally oversaw this prosecution, despite it being a routine DUI case, hardly something that typically involves the district attorney directly. Maya watched the dynamic shift before her eyes. Lawrence and Winters were no longer in control. They were defending themselves against increasingly damning revelations. Samuel Daniels seized the momentum. Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Collins and his release pending a full investigation into misconduct by the prosecutor's office. Lawrence surged to his feet. This is outrageous. One teenager's conspiracy theories don't justify— Sit down, Richard, Judge Montgomery commanded, her voice like steel. This isn't about Maya Collins's theories. This is about evidence I've personally reviewed and found deeply troubling. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that I am ordering an immediate stay of Mr. Collins's sentence and his release on his own recognizance, pending a full evidentiary hearing. Maya gasped, clutching her father's arm. James Collins sat motionless, as if afraid to believe what he was hearing. Furthermore, Judge Montgomery continued, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into potential prosecutorial misconduct and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Ms. Winters paled. Your Honor, please. You'll have your opportunity to explain yourself to the Attorney General, Ms. Winters. The judge's tone was final. This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Collins, you'll be processed for release within the hour. Mr. Daniels, prepare your motion for the evidentiary hearing. I want all of this on the record formally. As everyone began gathering their papers, Maya caught Richard Lawrence staring at her with an expression that sent chills down her spine. Not anger, but calculation, as if he were measuring her, assessing a threat. The court reporter packed up her equipment and left, followed by a shell-shocked Ms. Winters. Judge Montgomery exchanged quiet words with Samuel Daniels, while Maya embraced her father, still hardly daring to believe he would be coming home. Lawrence lingered, pulling out his phone and stepping into the corner to make a call, his voice too low to overhear. When he finished, he approached Maya and James with a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Collins, I want you to know that if there were irregularities in your father's case, my office will cooperate fully with any investigation. We're committed to justice above all. The practiced words rang hollow, especially after what they'd just learned. Maya met his gaze evenly. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I'm sure the Attorney General will appreciate your cooperation. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Indeed. Well, I should let you celebrate your temporary victory. With a nod to Judge Montgomery that bordered on disrespectful, he left the room. Once he was gone, the judge approached Maya and James. Mr. Collins, while I'm allowing your release, I must caution both of you. The connections we've uncovered today suggest something far more troubling than simple prosecutorial overreach. Until we understand why so many people were invested in your conviction, you should be extremely careful. James nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for giving me a chance. Judge Montgomery's expression softened slightly. You have your daughter to thank. Her persistence is what brought these issues to light. She turned to Maya. You should be proud of what you've accomplished, but please heed my warning about being careful. People who have gone to these lengths once may do so again. As they left the conference room, Maya felt a confusing mix of emotions. Elation that her father would be coming home, vindication that her suspicions had been proven right, but also a growing sense of dread. The conspiracy they'd uncovered wasn't just about an accident or a wrongful conviction. There was something deeper, something that powerful people were desperate to keep hidden. And now those people knew exactly who had exposed them. The Collins home buzzed with subdued celebration that evening. James sat at the kitchen table, still looking somewhat disoriented by his sudden freedom, his prison jumpsuit replaced by old jeans and a faded t-shirt that hung loosely on his thinner frame. Aunt Patricia had prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes. But James ate slowly, as if reacquainting himself with flavors he'd been denied for 3 years. Maya couldn't stop staring at her father, afraid he might somehow disappear if she looked away. The reality of his presence in their home, sitting at their table, felt both miraculous and fragile. "You look just like your mother," James said softly, catching her watching him. "She would have been so proud of what you did." Maya swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "I just couldn't let it stand. I knew you were innocent." "Still, what you did..." James shook his head in wonder. "Taking on the whole system, standing up to a judge. Most adults wouldn't have had that courage." Aunt Patricia set down a piece of apple pie in front of him. "Your daughter is nothing if not stubborn. Once she decides something is wrong, there's no stopping her." James smiled, the expression still rusty on his face. Like father, like daughter. Later, after Patricia had gone to bed, Maya sat with her father in the living room. The TV played quietly in the background, but neither was watching it. "Dad," Maya said hesitantly, "do you think it was really a setup? The call from Walter Kruger?" James rubbed his face, suddenly looking tired. "I've had 3 years to think about that night, Maya. At first I thought it was just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. But now..." He trailed off, staring into the middle distance. "Why would Evelyn Porter's brother-in-law call me specifically, out of all the mechanics in the area? And why was Mrs. Porter on that road at that exact time?" Maya added. "It's not a main route. It's barely used except by locals." "Exactly." James looked troubled. "If Kruger deliberately sent me there, and Evelyn Porter happened to be there at the same time..." "It wasn't an accident at all," Maya finished, the implication sending a chill through her. "But why? Why would they want to frame you for killing her?" James shook his head. "I don't know. I was just a mechanic with a small shop. I kept to myself after your mother died. I didn't have enemies, at least none that I knew of." Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming email. Seeing it was from the anonymous address, she opened it immediately. Collins wasn't the target. He was the scapegoat. Look into Landmark Development's bid for the industrial park. Porter was going to testify. Maya frowned. "Dad, does Landmark Development mean anything to you?" James thought for a moment. "They're a big property development company owned by the Hargrove family, Judge Hargrove's family. They've been buying up land all over the county for years." His eyes widened suddenly. "Wait, there was a controversy about the old Westbrook Industrial Park around the time of the accident. They wanted to build luxury condos, but there were environmental concerns." Maya typed quickly on her phone, searching for news articles. "Here it is. Landmark Development's bid to redevelop the industrial park was approved 3 months after Mrs. Porter's death. Before that, it was stalled by environmental protests." She read further, her excitement growing. Evelyn Porter was the lead scientist opposing the development. She claimed there was significant contamination at the site that Landmark was covering up. James leaned forward. "And after she died?" "The opposition fell apart. The project was fast-tracked and approved." Maya looked up, the pieces fitting together. Mrs. Porter was going to testify at a county hearing the week after she died. "So someone wanted her silenced," James said grimly, "and I became the convenient fall guy, Judge Hargrove's family directly benefited from her death, Maya realized. That's why he never recused himself from your case. He was protecting the family business. James stood up and began pacing. We need to take this to Judge Montgomery. Not tonight, Maya cautioned, but first thing tomorrow. She hesitated, then added, Dad, whoever is sending these anonymous tips knows a lot about what happened. They might be someone on the inside. James nodded slowly. Which means they're taking a huge risk. If they're discovered, the implication hung in the air between them. People who had orchestrated a woman's death and framed an innocent man wouldn't hesitate to silence a whistleblower. Before they could discuss it further, the sharp crack of breaking glass shattered the quiet night. James instinctively pushed Maya to the floor as something came hurtling through their front window. A brick landed on the carpet, a piece of paper wrapped around it secured with a rubber band. Stay down, James ordered, crawling toward the object. Heart pounding, Maya watched her father carefully unwrap the paper. His face darkened as he read the message. What does it say? She whispered. James turned the paper so she could see the typed message. Drop it now, or next time it won't be a brick. Across town, Judge Harriet Montgomery sat in her home office, reviewing her notes on the Collins case while nursing a glass of whiskey. The day's revelations had shaken her more than she cared to admit. What had begun as a simple question of evidentiary irregularities had morphed into something far more sinister, a coordinated conspiracy involving judges, prosecutors, and business interests. Her doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence at nearly 10 at night. Through the peephole, she saw Detective Michael Saunders standing on her porch, his expression grave. Mike, she greeted him, opening the door. It's late for a social call. This isn't social, he replied grimly, stepping inside. I thought you should know. Richard Lawrence has been making calls all afternoon. He's trying to get you removed from the Collins case, claiming bias. Harriet snorted. Let him try. The evidence speaks for itself. There's more, Mike continued, following her to the kitchen. I did some digging into landmark development. The project Evelyn Porter was fighting would have been worth over $200 million to the Hargrove family. A powerful motive, Harriet murmured. Judge Hargrove isn't the only one with connections to Landmark. Gerald Porter's construction company got the exclusive contract for the first phase of development after his wife's death, a contract worth $50 million. Harriet's eyes widened. Are you saying Gerald Porter was involved in his own wife's death? I'm saying the connections run deeper than we thought. Mike pulled out his notebook. There's something else you should know. Your clerk, Marcus Chen? His brother works for Landmark as their head of security. Harriet felt a chill run down her spine. You think Marcus has been informing on me? I think you should be careful who you trust. Mike hesitated, then added, There's also been chatter about James Collins. Someone put out the word that he's a problem that needs solving. A hit? Harriet whispered, horrified. Nothing that explicit, but the message was clear. Collins and his daughter need protection. Harriet reached for her phone. I'll call the sheriff's department. Already taken care of, Mike assured her. I have a deputy watching their house tonight, unofficially. But Harriet, his expression grew more serious. You might be in danger too. Whoever is behind this has a lot to lose if the truth comes out. I can take care of myself, she replied, though the anonymous text message she'd received flashed in her mind. Mike studied her face. There's something personal about this case for you, isn't there? I've known you 20 years, Harriet. I can tell when something's hitting close to home. Harriet was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she walked to her desk and pulled out the old photograph she'd been looking at earlier. The young girl with dark braids standing beside a tall man in a mechanic's uniform. My father was wrongfully convicted when I was 17, she said quietly, handing Mike the photo. No one would listen to me when I tried to prove his innocence. By the time he was exonerated, he was dying of cancer. Maya Collins reminds me of myself at that age, determined, unafraid to speak truth to power. Mike looked at the photograph, understanding dawning in his eyes. So this isn't just about justice for James Collins. It's about making sure what happened to my father doesn't happen to hers, Harriet admitted. About making the system work the way it's supposed to. The system is made of people, Harriet. Flawed, corruptible people. All the more reason to hold them accountable when they abuse their power. She took back the photograph, carefully returning it to her desk. I won't back down from this, Mike, not even if they come after me directly. I figured you'd say that, he replied with a resigned smile. That's why I brought this. He handed her a small case. New security system for your house. High tech, impossible to bypass. I'm installing it tonight. You think that's necessary? I think people who orchestrate murder and frame innocent men don't play by the rules, and neither should we when it comes to protecting ourselves. As Mike began setting up the security system, Harriet's phone rang. It was James Collins. Mr. Collins, is everything all right? Someone just threw a brick through our window with a warning message, James said, his voice tight with controlled fear. I'm worried about Maya's safety. Stay where you are, Harriet instructed. I'm sending someone to bring you to a secure location. As she ended the call, Harriet met Mike's concerned gaze. It's starting, she said grimly. They're making their move. The safe house was a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, owned by the county but used primarily for witness protection. Maya sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, combing through years of newspaper archives about landmark development, while her father and Aunt Patricia tried to make the unfamiliar space feel like home. Detective Saunders had escorted them here in the middle of the night, his unmarked car taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. Found something, Maya announced, turning her screen to show her father. Evelyn Porter wasn't just opposed to the development, she had proof of contamination. Look at this article from a week before she died. James leaned over her shoulder to read the headline. Local scientist claims evidence of toxic cover-up at industrial park site. According to anonymous sources, Maya read aloud, Dr. Porter has obtained soil samples showing dangerous levels of carcinogens that Landmark Development failed to disclose in their environmental impact report. Porter is expected to present these findings at next week's county zoning hearing. James's expression darkened. But she never made it to that hearing. And the soil samples were never found, Maya added, scrolling further. The police report says they weren't in her car or at her office. A soft knock at the door made them both jump. Detective Saunders appeared from the back room where he'd been checking the security system. It's Judge Montgomery, he said, his hand resting casually near his holster as he approached the door. The judge entered, looking weary but alert, dressed in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from her judicial robes. She carried a leather briefcase and a grim expression. Thank you for coming, Your Honor, James said, rising to greet her. Under the circumstances, I think you can call me Harriet, she replied with a tired smile. I've just come from an emergency meeting with the Attorney General's office. They're taking this very seriously. Have they arrested anyone? Maya asked eagerly. Harriet set her briefcase on the table. Not yet, but they've opened a formal investigation into Judge Hargrove, Richard Lawrence, and Gerald Porter. She pulled out a folder. I brought copies of everything I've gathered so far. I thought you should see this. She spread photographs on the table, surveillance images showing Richard Lawrence meeting with Gerald Porter at a restaurant, Judge Hargrove entering Landmark Development's offices, Officer Kellerman accepting an envelope from Porter in a parking garage. These were taken over the past 2 years, Harriet explained. Detective Saunders has been investigating corruption in the DA's office for months. Your case broke it open. Maya studied the images. They've been working together all this time, even after my dad was convicted. Why? Money, Detective Saunders said bluntly. The industrial park development was just the beginning. Landmark has secured 3 major county contracts since then, all with limited competition and expedited approvals. But something else has been bothering me, Harriet continued. This conspiracy involves high-level officials, business interests, and serious crimes. Yet someone has been helping us uncover it, sending anonymous tips. She turned to Maya. Have you received any more messages? Maya hesitated, then nodded. One more, right before the brick came through our window. It mentioned Landmark Development and said my dad wasn't the target, just the scapegoat. I think I know who's sending them, Harriet said slowly, and why they can't come forward openly. She pulled out one last photograph, a woman with dark hair at what appeared to be a funeral. This is Evelyn Porter's sister, Catherine Kruger, Walter Kruger's wife. James leaned forward, studying the image. The sister of the woman who died in the accident? The wife of the man who lured me to that road? Harriet nodded. Catherine worked as a lab assistant for her sister. After Evelyn's death, she took a job with the county clerk's office, specifically handling records for the courts and the DA's office. She has access to everything, Maya realized. All the documents, all the connections. But why would she help us? James asked. Her sister died in that accident. Maybe because she knows it wasn't an accident, Detective Saunders suggested. Maybe she figured out her husband was involved in her sister's death. A sudden thought struck Maya. The soil samples. What if Catherine has them? What if she took them after her sister died to keep them safe? That would explain why she hasn't come forward openly, Harriet agreed. Those samples would be damning evidence, not just of environmental crimes, but of motive for murder. We need to talk to her, Maya insisted. It's too dangerous, Detective Saunders countered. If her husband or any of the others suspect she's the leak, her life would be in danger. Her life is already in danger, Harriet said grimly, as is everyone who knows the truth about this conspiracy. She turned to Maya. Can you try to contact her through whatever channel she's been using to send you messages? Maya opened her laptop. I can reply to the email address. I don't know if she'll get it, but it's worth trying. As Maya composed a message, Detective Saunders's phone rang. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he listened. What is it? Harriet asked when he ended the call. Someone broke into your chambers at the courthouse, he reported. Your clerk, Marcus Chen, caught them searching through your files. He was attacked but managed to call 911. Is he all right? Harriet asked, alarmed. Concussion, some bruises. But here's where it gets interesting. He claims the attacker was Officer Brian Kellerman. A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed this development. They're destroying evidence, Harriet realized. They know we're building a case. We need to move fast, Detective Saunders agreed. The Attorney General is sending a team first thing tomorrow, but a lot can happen between now and then. Maya's laptop chimed with an incoming email. Everyone turned as she opened it. It's from the anonymous address, she reported, reading aloud. Not safe to meet. Porter's soil samples are in safe deposit box at First Westbrook Bank. Key is hidden at Evelyn's grave, under the Stone Angel's wing. Gerald and Walter planning to leave the country tomorrow. Lawrence destroying evidence tonight. James let out a slow breath. So Catherine Kruger is helping us. And putting herself at enormous risk, Harriet added. If her husband discovers what she's done. We need those soil samples, Detective Saunders said firmly. They're physical proof of motive. But the bank won't open until morning, and by then... The Stone Angel, Maya interrupted. We need that key tonight. The cemetery isn't far from here. It's too dangerous, James protested. You're not going to a cemetery in the middle of the night while people are trying to silence us." "I'll go," Detective Saunders offered. "I can be there and back in 30 minutes. "No," Harriet shook her head. "You need to stay with the Collins family. I'll go." "With all due respect, Judge, you're not trained for this kind of operation," Saunders argued. "I'm not helpless, Detective," Harriet replied with a hint of steel in her voice. "And I'm less likely to draw attention than a police officer. I'll take my personal vehicle and keep in contact by phone." After further discussion and over multiple objections, they agreed to Harriet's plan. Before leaving, she took Maya aside. "If anything happens to me," she said quietly, "there's something you should know. I believed you from the beginning because I saw myself in you." She pulled out the old photograph of herself as a teenager with her father. "My father was wrongfully convicted when I was just a bit older than you. No one would listen to me when I tried to prove his innocence." Maya stared at the photograph, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's why you let me speak in court. You saw yourself." Harriet nodded. "By the time my father was exonerated, he was dying. I became a judge to make sure the system worked better for others than it did for him." She squeezed Maya's shoulder. "Whatever happens, don't give up. The truth has a way of coming out, even when powerful people try to bury it." As Harriet left for the cemetery, Maya returned to the kitchen where her father and Detective Saunders were reviewing the evidence they'd gathered. "We should prepare for the possibility that they'll come after us here," Saunders was saying. "This location is supposed to be secure, but with high-level officials involved, we can't be certain." James nodded grimly. "What about the Attorney General's team? Can we trust them?" "The AG himself is a former colleague of Judge Montgomery's. They go way back. If anyone in the state justice system is beyond corruption, it's him." Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "They know where you are. Get out now." She showed the message to Saunders, whose face hardened immediately. "Pack up quickly. We need to move to a secondary location." As they hastily gathered their belongings, Maya couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. Judge Montgomery was alone at the cemetery, possibly walking into danger. Meanwhile, they were fleeing a supposedly secure location that had somehow been compromised. How deep did this conspiracy go? And how many people were they really up against? Westbrook Cemetery lay shrouded in mist, the old stone markers rising like sentinels from the damp ground. Harriet Montgomery parked her car a block away and approached on foot, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as she navigated the silent pathways. The cemetery was deserted at this late hour, the only sounds her own footsteps on the gravel paths and the distant hoot of an owl. Finding Evelyn Porter's grave took longer than expected. The stone angel marking it stood in the newer section, its wings spread as if in flight, the marble gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Harriet glanced around cautiously before kneeling beside the monument. Running her fingers along the underside of one smooth wing, she felt something taped securely to the stone. A small plastic bag containing a safety deposit box key. "Got it," she whispered to herself, pocketing the key. The snap of a twig behind her was her only warning. Harriet spun around, flashlight beam illuminating a familiar face. Walter Kruger, his expression a mask of cold fury. "Judge Montgomery," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Out for a midnight stroll in the cemetery?" Harriet rose slowly, her mind racing. "Mr. Kruger, I'm surprised to see you here." "Are you?" He took a step closer. "I think you know exactly why I'm here. The same reason you are." His eyes flickered to the stone angel. "My wife has been careless, sentimental. I should have known she'd hide it here at her sister's grave." Harriet's hand closed around the key in her pocket. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Kruger scoffed. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence. Catherine has been feeding you information. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Her own husband? Where is Catherine now? Harriet asked, keeping her voice level despite the fear building inside her. Something dark flashed across Kruger's face. Somewhere safe, until she comes to her senses. The implication was clear, and Harriet felt sick. You helped kill her sister, and now you've done something to Catherine. How do you live with yourself, Mr. Kruger? It wasn't personal, he replied, as if discussing a business transaction. Evelyn was going to destroy everything, the development, our futures, millions in contracts. She wouldn't listen to reason. So you arranged an accident, Harriet said, edging sideways, trying to create distance between them, and framed an innocent man. Kruger shrugged. Collins was convenient. Right place, right time. It was actually Gerald's idea. He'd heard Collins would be driving after drinking. All we needed was to get him on that road when Evelyn was driving home. And Judge Hargrove made sure the trial went the way you wanted. The system works for those who know how to use it. Kruger reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. Now, I'll take that key. Harriet froze, her mind calculating options. Her car was too far away to run for it. Screaming would be useless in the deserted cemetery. Her only hope was to keep him talking. The Attorney General is already investigating, she said. Killing me won't stop that. No, but it will buy us time to disappear. The key, Judge Montgomery. Now. Harriet's phone buzzed in her pocket, Detective Saunders checking in. The momentary distraction was all she needed. She flung her flashlight directly at Kruger's face, diving behind a large tombstone as he fired. The bullet struck stone, sending chips of marble flying. Heart pounding, Harriet scrambled between graves, using the monuments as cover. Another shot rang out, closer this time. She needed to reach the cemetery gates, get to the street where there might be witnesses. You can't escape, Judge, Kruger called, his voice echoing unnervingly among the graves. There's nowhere to run. Harriet crouched behind a large family crypt, trying to control her breathing. She could hear Kruger moving methodically through the cemetery, searching for her. The moonlight that had seemed romantic earlier now felt exposing, casting shadows that could reveal her position. Her phone vibrated again. Shielding the screen with her body, she glanced down to see a text from Detective Saunders. Safe house compromised. Moving Collins family. Where are you? With trembling fingers, she typed, Cemetery, Kruger here, armed, need help. The response came immediately. On my way. 10 minutes. Stay hidden. 10 minutes. She had to survive 10 minutes against an armed man in an open cemetery. Harriet closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. Then, keeping low, she began moving again, circling back toward the entrance. A shot exploded near her head, sending her sprawling onto the damp ground. Kruger had spotted her. End of the line, Judge, he said, approaching with his gun trained on her. The key. Last chance. Slowly, Harriet reached into her pocket and pulled out the safety deposit box key. Kruger extended his hand to take it, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. The smile vanished as headlights suddenly illuminated the cemetery gates, a car screeching to a halt outside. Kruger hesitated, momentarily distracted, and Harriet seized her chance. She kicked upward, striking his wrist. The gun fired into the air as it went flying from his grip. Kruger recovered quickly, lunging for her. They grappled on the ground, rolling between gravestones as Harriet fought with a desperation born of survival. Despite her age, years of martial arts training gave her an edge. She managed to break free, scrambling toward the gates where figures were now rushing into the cemetery. Judge Montgomery! Detective Saunders' voice called out. Here! She shouted back, her voice hoarse. Kruger made a final desperate attempt to recapture her, but froze at the sound of multiple guns being cocked. Walter Kruger, you're under arrest, Saunders announced, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Hands where we can see them." As Kruger was handcuffed and led away, Harriet leaned against a gravestone, adrenaline still coursing through her body. "The Collins family," she managed between breaths. "Are they safe?" "At the secondary location with a protective detail," Saunders assured her. "Maya figured out you might be in danger when she received another anonymous text warning that Kruger had discovered his wife's betrayal." "Catherine," Harriet remembered with alarm. "Kruger said he has her somewhere safe. We need to find her before—" "Already on it," Saunders cut in. "We have officers at their home now." By dawn, the pieces had fallen into place with stunning rapidity. Catherine Kruger was found locked in the basement of her home, shaken but alive. Walter Kruger, facing multiple felony charges and hoping for leniency, began talking immediately, implicating Gerald Porter, Judge Hargrove, and District Attorney Lawrence in the conspiracy. The soil samples retrieved from the safety deposit box the following morning provided the final piece of evidence, irrefutable proof of toxic contamination that Landmark Development had covered up, and the motive for Evelyn Porter's murder. At the Collins' new safe location, a hotel suite guarded by Attorney General's officers, Maya, James, and Aunt Patricia watched the morning news in stunned silence as reporters detailed the unfolding scandal. Footage showed Richard Lawrence and Judge Hargrove being led from their homes in handcuffs, their faces ashen with the shock of powerful men suddenly stripped of their protection. "I can hardly believe it," Patricia murmured. "All those important people, involved in something so terrible." "I can believe it," Maya said quietly. "Power doesn't make people more moral. Sometimes it just gives them more opportunity to act on their worst impulses." A knock at the door announced Judge Montgomery's arrival. Despite the eventful night, she appeared composed, though there was a small bandage on her forehead and bruising visible on her wrist. "Judge," James greeted her, concern evident in his voice. "We heard what happened. Are you all right?" "Nothing a hot shower and strong coffee couldn't fix," she replied with a tired smile. "I wanted to update you personally. The Attorney General has dropped all charges against you, Mr. Collins. Your record will be expunged, and there will be substantial compensation for wrongful imprisonment." James sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the news. "I never thought this day would come." "There's more," Harriet continued. "Catherine Kruger has formally come forward. She's been secretly gathering evidence against her husband, Gerald Porter, and the others for years. After her sister's death, she suspected foul play but needed proof before she could act." "The anonymous emails," Maya realized. Harriet nodded. "She was afraid to contact us directly, knowing her husband was monitoring her. But she left breadcrumbs, hoping someone would follow them." "And Maya did," James said proudly. "My daughter never gave up." "Neither did Catherine," Harriet pointed out. "Even after losing her sister and discovering her husband's involvement, she kept fighting for justice. It takes remarkable courage." Maya thought about the women who had made this moment possible. Catherine Kruger, silently gathering evidence while living with one of the conspirators. Judge Montgomery, facing down an armed man in a cemetery to retrieve crucial evidence. Even Evelyn Porter, who had died trying to expose the truth. "What happens now?" she asked. "The investigation continues," Harriet replied. "There may be others involved who haven't been identified yet. But the central conspiracy has been exposed. The Attorney General believes the case against Kruger, Porter, Hargrove, and Lawrence is overwhelming. They'll likely face charges ranging from corruption and obstruction of justice to conspiracy to commit murder." "And we can go home?" James asked hopefully. "Soon," Harriet promised. "There are still details to work out, statements to take. But yes, you'll be able to return to your lives." She smiled at Maya. "Though I suspect your life might look rather different now. A 16-year-old who brought down a corrupt judge, a district attorney, and exposed a murder conspiracy. There might be a future in law for you." Maya returned the smile, feeling for the first time in 3 years that the future held promise rather than dread. "Maybe. But first I just want to have dinner with my dad, at home, without looking over our shoulders." "A worthy goal," Harriet agreed, "and one that's finally within reach." 6 months later, the Westbrook County Courthouse looked different to Maya Collins. The imposing stone columns and high windows no longer seemed intimidating, but rather like guardians of a system that, despite its flaws, could still deliver justice when the right people fought hard enough. Today, she climbed the worn marble steps with purpose rather than anxiety. The hearing for James Collins' official exoneration and compensation was a formality at this point, but an important one, a public acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done and the efforts to make it right. "Ready for this?" James asked, adjusting his tie nervously. He was dressed in a new suit, his once gaunt face filled out, his hair neatly trimmed. 6 months of freedom had begun to erase the physical marks of his imprisonment, though Maya knew the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. "More than ready," she replied, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. Inside, courtroom 3B was packed to capacity. The case had become a national sensation as the conspiracy unraveled, exposing corruption that reached into every corner of Westbrook's justice system. Journalists filled the back rows, while the gallery held a mixture of supporters and curious onlookers. Samuel Daniels, who had stayed on as James's attorney through the compensation negotiations, waited for them at the defense table. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Victoria Reynolds," the bailiff announced. Judge Reynolds, brought in from a neighboring county to ensure impartiality, took her place on the bench. The proceedings moved quickly: formal dismissal of all charges, expungement of James's record, and approval of a $5.2 million compensation package for his wrongful imprisonment. As they were leaving the courtroom amid congratulations and camera flashes, Maya spotted Harriet Montgomery standing quietly in the corridor. No longer a judge, she had resigned her position to testify against her former colleagues. Harriet was now working with the Innocence Project, using her legal expertise to help others wrongfully convicted. "Judge Montgomery?" Maya called, hurrying over to her. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "Not judge anymore," Harriet corrected gently. "Just Harriet." "You'll always be judge to me," Maya insisted. "You're the one who listened when no one else would." Harriet smiled, the expression softening her usually stern features. "I wanted to see it through, to witness justice finally being served." She extended her hand to James. "Congratulations, Mr. Collins. Though no amount of money can restore the years taken from you, I hope it helps you rebuild." "It will," James assured her, shaking her hand firmly. "We're reopening my garage, upgrading the equipment. Maya's college fund is secure. And we've established a foundation to help families of wrongfully convicted individuals navigate the legal system." "I'm impressed," Harriet said. "Most people would be tempted to leave Westbrook far behind after what happened." "We considered it," Maya admitted. "But this is our home, and after what we went through, we wanted to stay and help make sure it doesn't happen to others." The crowd in the corridor began to thin as people moved toward the courthouse steps for the press conference that would follow. Maya noticed Catherine Kruger standing alone near a window, looking both relieved and melancholy. After her testimony had helped convict her husband, Gerald Porter, and the others, Catherine had become both a hero and a pariah in certain circles of Westbrook society. "Excuse me," Maya said to her father and Harriet. "There's someone I need to thank." Catherine looked up as Maya approached, a sad smile touching her lips. "Maya Collins, the brave girl who started it all." "I couldn't have done it without your help," Maya replied. "Your anonymous emails guided us to the truth." Catherine glanced out the window, her expression distant. "I should have come forward sooner. If I had, Maybe you and your father wouldn't have suffered for so long. You were married to one of the conspirators, Maya reminded her gently. You did what you could, when you could. And you risked everything to help us in the end. I keep thinking about Evelyn, Catherine said softly. How she'd be proud of what we accomplished together. The development project has been permanently halted. The environmental contamination is being cleaned up. And the people responsible are facing justice, Maya added. Your sister didn't die in vain. Across the corridor, Harriet watched the interaction with appreciation. She's remarkable, she said to James. Your daughter has wisdom beyond her years. James nodded, pride evident in his expression. Maya was always special, even before all this happened. But fighting for me, standing up to the system, it's changed her, made her stronger, more determined. Has she decided about law school? She's considering it, James replied with a chuckle. Though at 17 she's got a bit of time to decide. For now, she's focusing on finishing high school and being a normal teenager, as normal as possible after everything that's happened. Normal is overrated, Harriet observed with a small smile. She's destined for extraordinary things. The courthouse doors opened as people began filing out for the press conference. James excused himself to join Maya, leaving Harriet alone with her thoughts. The past 6 months had brought seismic changes to her life, stepping down from the bench, testifying against colleagues she'd known for decades, and completely reorienting her career at an age when most were considering retirement. Yet she felt more purposeful now than she had in years. The Collins case had awakened something in her that had long been dormant, a passionate commitment to justice that transcended procedure and protocol. In many ways, Maya Collins had given her a second chance just as much as she'd helped give one to James. Outside on the courthouse steps, James stood before a bank of microphones, Maya at his side. Reporters called out questions about the compensation, their plans for the future, and their feelings about the conspirators awaiting trial. We're grateful for the outcome, James said, his voice steady and clear. But no amount of money can restore the 3 years I lost. What matters most is that the truth came to light, and those responsible are being held accountable. A reporter pushed forward. Mr. Collins, your daughter has been called a hero for her persistence in proving your innocence. What would you say to other families facing similar situations? James looked at Maya, his eyes shining with emotion. I'd tell them not to give up. The system isn't perfect. It's made of people, and people make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are innocent. Sometimes they're deliberate. But the truth has a way of finding a voice. He put his arm around Maya's shoulders. My daughter became that voice for me when I had no voice of my own. She reminds us all that justice sometimes needs champions, people brave enough to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. Maya stepped forward, initially hesitant to address the crowd, but finding her confidence as she spoke. 3 years ago, I was just a kid who believed her dad was innocent. I had no legal training, no connections, no power. All I had was determination and the truth. What I learned is that sometimes that's enough. Sometimes one person who refuses to be silenced can make all the difference. Her eyes found Harriet standing at the edge of the crowd and Catherine a few steps away. But I wasn't really alone. There were others fighting for truth in their own ways. Judge Montgomery, who had the courage to listen when others wouldn't. Catherine Kruger, who gathered evidence at great personal risk. Detective Saunders, who followed the facts rather than the convenient narrative. As the press conference concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Harriet approached Maya one last time. You know, she said quietly, years ago, I stood on these same steps, devastated because no one would listen to me about my father's case. I vowed then that if I ever had the power to make a difference, I would use it to ensure justice was served. Is that why you became a judge? Maya asked. It's why I became the kind of judge I was, Harriet corrected. Sometimes stern, often demanding, but always willing to hear new evidence, even when it came from unexpected sources. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped package. I wanted you to have this. Maya opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. Inside the cover, Harriet had written, "To Maya, whose courage reminds us that justice depends not on power or position, but on those brave enough to demand it. Your journey is just beginning." "Thank you," Maya said, deeply touched by the gesture. "You're welcome," Harriet replied. "And Maya, if you ever decide to pursue law, I'd be honored to mentor you." As Maya rejoined her father and Aunt Patricia, walking down the courthouse steps into the bright autumn sunshine, she felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The nightmare was over. Her father was free. The truth had prevailed. Whatever path she chose, law, advocacy, or something entirely different, Maya knew now that one person with courage and conviction could indeed change the system. Not easily, and not without help, but it was possible. And that knowledge, perhaps more than anything else, was the greatest victory of all.